But now we can have Vitalik maybe also join us like for a few like questions.
Yeah, sure.
I guess there's no need to like intro, but like maybe you can like tell us a bit of like what attracts you to this event.
Yeah, I mean, I've been like starting to follow the crypto AI space recently, and I think it's one of those spaces that I think is interesting because like a lot of people intuitively feel like there should be a connection, and there's this kind of bilateral correspondence between the two, and people say things like, oh, crypto and AI are the two big technologies they have to combine somehow, or like AI is the big centralizing one and AI is the big decentralizing, or AI is the big centralizing one and crypto is the big decentralizing one, and so it needs to balance AI out and all these things, right? And so there are all of these like things that feel like natural correspondences on this very high narrative level, but I've always been curious about how that might translate into actual applications. And so the post that I wrote about 6 weeks ago is like basically on that topic, right? Like basically trying to understand like what are actual applications that include both AI and some kind of cryptographic and blockchain component, where the result of combining the two together is actually useful, right? Yeah, and so like identified the 4 categories, which are one is like basically you have AIs as players of games, right? And that's like, this is one of those things that's like almost too trivial that people don't think of it as a crypto AI intersection, but it's like a crypto AI intersection that has literally been running for 10 years, which is just like AI trading plots, right? Like, the crypto incentives set up a market and AI is participating in that market, right? And that's and now, we have on-chain DEXs, and now we have on-chain NFT markets, and you had bots participating in those. And I think the next frontier of that, which actually gets it into terrain that's like much more interesting, is setting up on-chain prediction markets, which are succeeding on their own already, right? Like we've been seeing Polymarket just being massively successful this year in a way that it totally was not before. With AI, you could potentially make micro prediction markets, right? Like prediction markets on like very small questions that are too small for like each individual person to really spend a lot of time thinking about, but where AIs can just like trivially come up with like approximate answers to thousands of them, right?
So like prediction markets, for example, like the earliest ones were failed, right? So it was like analysis, like some they were on the stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason why I think things like Gnosis and Logger and so forth failed were, one, I think they were just like too early in the sense that there wasn't enough of a network effect yet. And another is that like the markets were just too inefficient. Like you can't have an efficient market when the trading fee on chain is like $150, right? Like I remember about 3 years ago, I wrote that blog post where I talked about my own experiences, like basically betting after the U.S. election that Trump will lose the election, right? And I remember, like I did the math, and I made a total of about like $58,000 profit because people somehow kept believing that Trump would somehow win. But out of those $58,000, I lost over $1,000 in fees, right? Like over $1,000. And so, like when you have fees that were that high, then like you cannot have like a working efficient market, right? But now I think with what we finally have L2 scaling, right? And with L2 scaling, scale as a limitation on blockchain applications is like finally going away as a problem, right? And the reason why I think this is really big, right? Like I think for a lot of the last 10 years, like a lot of people have been complaining, like, there are all of these crypto applications that work really well in theory, but in practice, like there's just gambling and there's these like dumb $3 million monkeys, right? But like the reason why the $3 million monkeys are like the only thing that can stick around is because the chain became too expensive for everything else, right? And so now we have layer 2s, and so we actually solve this scaling problem, and so like the much more diverse set of applications, like all of the really interesting stuff that people have been dreaming about for a decade, like can actually happen, right? And so like with prediction markets, like you can actually have
much smaller scale markets because like you could have trading fees that are like 1 cent, right? And then with AIs, like the cognitive cost of like figuring out how to even bet on a particular issue, like that goes down, right? And so you can literally have markets with like $10 of depth, and you can have markets for every question, right?
So is like prediction markets your favorite use case?
It's I think the reason why I'm interested in that is because it's the use case that doesn't require like anything else that's fancy on the technical side, right? Like it feels like it has a less technical risk than all the other use cases, right? Like I think the big technical risk that I like see in like even like Bittensor, for example, and like I fully applaud the effort to just like charge out the problem and do your best to solve it, right? Is basically the risk that like you try really hard to make this decentralized incentivization work, but like in practice, economies of scale are just bigger and better, and like the centralized approach of having 10,000 GPUs in a farm is just going to beat it, right? Like I think if you look at sort of the idealistic decentralized compute stuff of 10 years ago, like like storage and like decentralized storage, decentralized compute, like that's basically a big part of the reason why they failed, right? That like there's this like theory of like, oh, it's free because there's all these idle resources and you can get them for really cheap, but then in practice, like economies of scale are too powerful, right? And so the big bet here is basically, can you make a market that's like powerful enough to overcome that, right? And so I think, if you can, then the set of applications that gets unlocked is like even more amazing, right? To me, that's kind of the big bet, right? And then, I also talked about in that post, like applications that have to do with, using new forms of cryptography to like even make encrypted AIs and like have an entire training and inference pipeline happen inside of multi-party computation. The reason you want to encrypt the AI is to protect it against adversarial attacks. And then even thinking about using crypto to like create incentives to create better AIs and all of those things. So I think there's like a chart where, like if you think about a chart where one axis is like how many technical assumptions are there, and the other axis is like how much value there's like things all across that spectrum.
So like besides that, what other like use case like you want to see like still from the space? Like you really expect to see like in the space that you will invest in?
I mean, I think, the challenge is like, useful and investable are often two very different things, I think in terms of what's useful, like the things, so we talked about AI prediction markets. Another big category that I mentioned is like the idea of using AIs to help users more easily and more safely navigate the crypto space, right? Because like one of the things that we've been seeing over the last year is we've been seeing AIs we've seen wallets get much better, right? Like if you look at Rabby, for example, like have you tried the Rabby wallet?
I invested in it as well.
Perfect. But important thing is to use it.
Yeah.
So if you use Rabby, right, like Rabby actually, like it does built-in transaction simulation, like it does a lot of these really useful things to like really help you understand what it is that you're actually agreeing to when you're signing transactions or like when you're approving messages, and like it's like trying harder to like actually like give users a secure experience, right? And I think the next frontier of that might involve incorporating AI in some way, right? Like I think realistically you want like a combination of some AI-based approach and like some more conventional approach, right? Like I don't believe in giving LLMs root access to anything because I think they're just like they're so vulnerable to all of these adversarial attacks. It's like every time there's some big model, like it's an event, like it just happens all the time that someone figures out how to get it to print out its secret prompt and do all kinds of crazy things, right? So like I would not trust an LLM with root access to like any of my coins or my computer or anything. But I think like a hybrid approach where you have a more regular interface and then you use the AI to kind of give a more natural language, like understanding of what's going on, and you basically have to you have both that are kind of check and balancing each other. I think is super interesting.
Yeah.
Lost a comment actually. I read your essay the other day on using AIs and prediction markets to create liquidity for answers. And I actually really think that coming at it from a machine learning perspective, you can use prediction markets to elicit the truth from participants, right? And that can be very valuable for collecting data sets, right? So you can do prediction markets on, say, will Donald Trump win the election? But you can also use prediction markets to say, hey, which of these prompt responses is better than another, and apply sort of an Oracle-based voting system. I think ideas like this are really interesting, something that could happen on Ethereum really well, as you said, and something that would be very valuable to the open source AI community. Really cool. I'd also like to comment, the question of does AI need crypto?
Yeah, I actually want to ask that.
Does crypto need AI, right? From one perspective, why would the AI people want crypto? There's a bunch of scammers, And why would the crypto people want AI? It's not verifiable. It's adversarial attacks and all that. But I think the proper way to think about the intersection is that actually they're the same technology. That's crazy, but it's true. Both of them are about organizing matter using incredibly powerful technology of self-organization, right? A lot of people say about crypto, it's like the power of crypto is the fact that you can build smart contracts where many people interact and you can organize people in a decentralized, permissionless way. That's just what they're doing with neural networks. Let's get a bunch of neurons and organize them and drive electricity through them, and they'll self-organize. They're both organizational principles. So I think that it's rather than thinking about the intersection, think about the union of the technologies, and that's really what Bittensor's been focusing on. Does it make sense for a decentralized computational system to win out against a centralized one? I was saying to Vitalik earlier that you have to rethink the problem formulation. There's just no way that we will beat OpenAI at its own game, training machine learning models in the same way. And so, if you look at the architecture of Bittensor, it's like a completely different roundabout way. It's like, okay, well, let's just, let's collect and organize a bunch of participants to train models in centralized houses, but compete in a decentralized way. But I also think that economies of scale is not the only thing that you can optimize. Like Airbnb, like the most optimized form of Airbnb is the Ritz Hotel, right? Well, why are the houses all in different places? They should all be in one place. Where there's all of the cleaners are in the same building. But the reason why Airbnb is so successful is because they take advantage of latent value, right? And they also nest the ability to make a good hosting experience underneath the market, right? With a voting system. And so, I think that the whole industry, if there's something that we're latching onto, it's the permissionlessness, it's the decentralization, and if it's not those things, then what the heck is it?
I think Airbnb is an interesting one because it's both a motivating tale and a cautionary tale, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The cautionary part of the tale is basically that there's this original vision that there's all of this spare housing lying around because people either go on vacations or have second or third homes or whatever, but in practice, in a lot of regions, what you see is you basically see that that sort of stuff just ends up being too complicated for those kinds of homeowners to bother with, and what actually happens is you just get very dedicated properties that are just designed to be essentially de facto hotels that get rented out through Airbnb, and it's just
It's converging on the hotel. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I guess everything is having a trade-off. Probably in terms of efficiency, just decentralized AI is very hard to really compete with centralized ones. What is really superior or from ideology wise is really essential for decentralized AI. So what is it? Why we have to do it? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I just hope it's not a narrative.
From my point of view, it's the two big risks from AI, right, as I've written about, is one is that misaligned AI kills everyone, and the second is that AI basically empowers one very small group of super centralized actors to have a very unprecedented level of control over everyone else.
The Elysium.
Yeah.
The Elysium.
Well, it's Elysium and 1984 and a couple of other things all in one, right? I think, if he wants to prevent the second one, then I think trying to bring the gap between like open and closed smaller is definitely a
but how about also solving both? Why not both?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of this ends up like getting into your question, like your own theory of like where the biggest risks from AI come from, right? Because like if, for example, the risk is that like if you just keep on piling more and more compute, then like you get some kind of like super intelligence that has agency, and once it happens, then like it'll have a survival instinct, and it'll just like end up taking over everything to just at first protect itself, and then it won't even care about humans. And then like the answer is don't build super intelligence and like focus much more entirely on like small scale stuff that tries to work with human agency instead of replacing it. And I think like in that case, there's this is one of the reasons why I'm excited about like brain computer interfaces, for example. But like
merge with the machine.
Exactly. Like even there, right? Like it's like small scale models totally have their place in that. Right?
Yeah. Well, people might not like this description of maybe a future for humanity, but humans evolved past all other creatures on Earth, if you believe in evolution. And we left some creatures in a really bad state. We put them all in cages, and we weren't able to live in like any husbandry with those animals. But then there's other creatures on this earth that we live in harmony with, like in a really huge way, right? Dogs and cats, right? I mean, no one wants to be a house cat for an AI. I'm sure that's not a great analogy, but the point I'm making is that it's possible to create symbiosis with wildly divergent levels of intelligence. In fact, to create different forms of intelligence. And I think that that's going to come down to a form of husbandry that we have to create with artificial intelligence, merge with the machine, as Tyler said. This is super sci-fi stuff, obviously. I don't think it's the most pressing question. Like, I really think the most pressing one is like the Elysium 1984 Fallout, where one mega lord controls the AI and all the money, and I think it's certainly something that Sam Altman is moving towards. Right? I think he absolutely thinks that's what's going to happen, and is trying to make it happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know his intention, but I think that's more pressing. So decentralization of the ownership of artificial intelligence, truly being able to interact with, contribute to own, profit from, to access. That's why people are obsessed with the open source AI direction, is just make sure that we can be symbiotic with the machine. And there's the whole other side that's just like destroy the machine. But I think everyone knows that that's just unreasonable and naive.
Yeah. So what kind of role like you think your network is like playing in terms of a decentralized AI? So Ethereum, for example, like what kind of like layer you could be for decentralized AI?
Yeah, I mean, I view Ethereum as like a very abstract and general purpose incentive layer, right? I think like it's a good layer to like put things like like tokens and like smart contract governance gadgets onto. I think in general, the way that I think about blockchain applications is that a lot of the time they have like a heavy component and a light component, right? Or rather, they have like a kind of like big but lower security component and like a small but like higher security core. And you want to put the small high security core on Ethereum, right? In some cases on O1, in some cases on a rollup, in some cases on a Validium. Once Zcash and ARCs improve, a little bit more, we'd love to, see you guys convert to being a rollup. 4844 is coming in 2 weeks, it's getting cheaper. The other side of this is like stuff that is like way too heavy to like ever put on a blockchain, but where it's like actually okay for it to exist on a separate layer as long as you have like the blockchain part guiding it, right? So like in another space, an example of this is like Farcaster, for example, right? Which is like, decentralized Twitter on the blockchain. And I think one of the reasons why Farcaster succeeded when a lot of other things failed is like it took a very pragmatic approach with its decentralization, right? Because there is the separate Farcaster chain, and that's where messages get put. But then usernames, right? Like those are just ENS names that are on Ethereum or or on their Ethereum L2, right? And so that like really important functionality, like names and account recovery, like you put onto Ethereum because it's like a very small amount of business logic, but it's very, very important that it works well. But then like you don't have, it's not that bad if like one forecaster message disappears, right? And so you have like a lower security layer for that. And I think like Bittensor, like it's, in your case, it's a similar architecture, right? Like, you have like the smaller incentive layer, but then you're not like literally putting gradient descent steps on the chain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have like any critiques to each other? Just in terms of like Ethereum or like Bittensor, what could have been done better?
No, Vitalik is my hero.
Vitalik, you can say something about like
I don't think I'm his hero.
Yes. No, as I said, I think you guys are like pushing directly against a challenge that I think is on the one hand quite hard, and it's one that in other industries has definitely failed before. But the upside, if it succeeds in a sector as important as this one, is large, right? So I think like really like making an honest try at that is a honorable effort. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do you see like each other's like network just moving forward, like like 5 years like from now on?
I don't think Vitalik knows enough about Bittensor, and I don't think I know enough about Ethereum to really forecast. But maybe I spoke too soon.
Well, that is something I think like Ethereum of Vitalik probably just like very bullish about like decentralized social. Just like moving forward like 5 years, what do you see like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I see this space is that I see the last 10 years as being like crypto and fairyland, right? Like there's a lot of development of core technology, of research, and of the crypto space being like this very insular thing that builds prototypes for itself. And I think the next 10 years have to be crypto in practice. And like actually building stuff that ends up reaching end users on a much larger scale. And I mean, one of the like crypto as money is one of those applications that to a large extent already has done that, right? Like there's a lot of people in Argentina, Turkey, Nigeria, like all kinds of countries that have like actual pressing inflation problems, and crypto is there for them, and they use like whether cryptocurrencies or USDC or whatever else for savings. The question is like, what are the other things that can get to that level of actual practical utility? And like with Forecaster, for example, I'm personally noticing that it's like getting actual utility, even from people who are not just kind of like forcing themselves to use it for ideological reasons, right? Like people are using it and continuing to use it because it's like actually a more enjoyable experience than Twitter itself, right? And I think the way that I see this with AI is like, AI is not an end user application, right? AI is a tool, right? But at the same time, AI is such a general purpose tool that it's going to have an impact to pretty much every end user application. And so I think it's it's really good that there's all kinds of groups working on getting this kind of infrastructure all figured out. I mean, all of that, the work on incentivizing trading is important. I think also, as I shouted out in the post, the WorldCoin team, I think, they sometimes get hated on, but I actually think that they have done a very thorough job of actually trying hard to do privacy and really being ahead of on putting data and models inside of NPCs as one good example, right? But these are all pieces in the middle, right? But then at the same time, we also need to the application layer, and I'm super excited to see what the community comes up with in that space.
So what should be the thing really got addressed often from a decentralized AI? Because there are so many things it's very dangerous to some degree, for example, of the pop culture because of or the ranking from Google and so on. So what would be a thing at this current stage that could be really solved well with decentralized AI?
I mean, already I think it is giving an opportunity to truly talented people to produce incredibly large language models that they would never be funded to create. permissionless systems are a little bit like companies without HR departments, without orders. I think that is an opportunity for really brilliant people. If they can come in and train machine learning models, get paid for it, they can get funded, they can get compute put behind them. Like people are always saying this, that there's not enough GPUs, but actually there's just not enough people that can run the GPUs. And I think that permissionless systems, orderless systems, like they're really good at not reading resumes and just focusing on the production of something and getting people to do it better than anyone else in the world. So I think that we're going to train the best language models in the world. It's only just a matter of time. A good example is like what happened on Submit 6. We had News Research. They were hailed the best fine-tuning team in the world for open source language models. And they got beat on their own subnet within a week. And that's because that just showcases all of the hidden, buried talent that is looking for an opportunity to show themselves. So I think that's the first application or use case of incentive mechanisms that have this permissionless quality. But I'll stop there. So you have to do the first.
Yeah, I think the other space where some kind of decentralized approach to AI is needed is training and inferring based off of people's private data, right? Because you could imagine a model running off of my entire chat history and discovering important facts about myself that I care about for all kinds of reasons, right? But I am sure as hell not going to submit my private chat logs to OpenAI, right? There's basically two ways to do that, right? One way is to have a model that I literally download and run locally, and the other way to do it is some kind of cryptography thing where we do 2 of 2 computation. And potentially both of those are valid paths, right? I think if you want to also keep the model private because if you want to protect it against adversarial attacks, for example, then you have to take the 2 of 2 approach. But in other cases, it's actually having something local might actually be better. So yeah, and I think there's that very large set of use cases there where we've only really started scratching the surface, and I think it would be cool to start scratching that surface a little bit deeper. But I think that that's going to end up heavily depending on some kind of cryptography enabled decentralized AI sector.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we have almost 1 hour of discussion. Any questions at the moment for Okay.
In the future, what's the end goal for rollups? Is optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, snarks, or what's the end goal?
Yeah, so my view is that ZK is just going to beat optimistic more and more over time, right? I think I've always been optimistic about optimistic rollups as this kind of shorter-term technology that can just get off the ground faster without using super fancy math. And I think that's proven true, right? The only stage 1 rollup that we currently have right now is Arbitrum, which is an optimistic rollup. But over time, I think the fundamental issue is that optimistic rollups have the 7-day withdrawal window, and that's just inconvenient enough that it's already starting to incentivize people to make all of these really awful, tokens with integrated bridges and all of these very fragilizing and centralizing designs. And ZK rollups, they have withdrawal windows that are in theory instant, but in practice, most ZK rollups today, they currently publish the chain once every few hours. And the reason why they publish the chain once every few hours is that that's how long it takes to make a snark, right? But the long run of snarks is that we will be able to snark whatever we want in real time, right? And we already know the theoretical architecture for how to do this. The theoretical architecture for how to do this is to split up the computation into steps. And then you have n different machines. And then the ith machine only does a snark of step I. And then you have a merging tree where you just take n proofs and you make proofs and proofs and proofs and then merge them in a logarithmic number of steps and you get to 1 proof, right?
They're building that on the Bittensor now.
Right, amazing, yeah. So that's just obviously the end game, but that's that has high overhead, right? And the question, because you need to do a lot of parallelization, and it's just an engineering problem to get to that point. And once we get to that point, like the logical endgame is that we get ZK rollups committing into Ethereum and having one slot latency, right? And I, fully expect that we are going to get to that point sooner than a lot of people think. Once we get to that point, I think it'll be also much easier to move between different rollups. The whole thing will feel like a very seamless experience. It'll be easier to do cross rollup operations. It'll be easier to do cross rollup accounts and all kinds of things. ZK snarks are changing a lot.
Okay, anyone else before we take a break? Okay, then thank you so much.
Thank you.